everybody. Welcome to this episode of Beyond the Label podcast. So for today, I have with me Stephanie Ng from Hong Kong. She's the founder of Body Banter and a new book author. So do you just want to tell us a little bit about what Body Banter is and then your new book?
Yeah, thanks, Leanne. Excited to meet all of you. So as Leanne said, I'm the founder of Body Banter, and Body Banter is a registered Section 88 charity in Hong Kong. And what we do is we spark conversations about body image with young people here in Hong Kong and globally as well, but with a primary focus on Hong Kong because that's where I grew up and I see a lot of need for this kind of conversation particularly. So that's why it's important, and this mission is so close to my heart. As Leanne also mentioned, I recently published a book. It's called Big Bites Break Boundaries, quite a mouthful, and it's about my personal experiences with an eating disorder in Hong Kong, as well as how that's informed my work in the mental health research and advocacy space. And yeah, again, it's very tied to the work I do at Body Banter, and I'm excited to share more with you today.
I am so excited. Me and Steph have actually been trying to schedule this podcast since years.
It's been so long.
It has been so long, and I'm actually so glad I got to catch you during this time because you can now tell us more about your book and your new adventures.
Yeah.
And so should we just jump right to it?
Absolutely.
How do you start all of this? How do you start your journey as a mental health advocate? Because it's not something that, first of all, it's not a common thing to talk about in Hong Kong.
For sure.
Secondly, it's not something that you can learn at school as well. So just tell us from day one.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm curious also to direct that question back to you because I know you do a lot of advocacy work as well. And for me, it all started from personal experience. I think for a lot of mental health advocates who kind of start off with personal experience, it becomes somewhat of a kind of a life mission, and it certainly kind of is the case for me. It also comes with its complications of being a lived experience advocate, someone who does the work or kind of community work based on personal experience, and I'll share a little bit more about that later. But just to talk a little bit to the point of how it all started. When I was a teenager growing up here in Hong Kong, I struggled with an eating disorder, and this experience really pointed me or brought to my awareness that there really was not just a shortage of resources that were available to help me at the time, but also there was a lot of stigma surrounding these kinds of conversations. And because of that, because perhaps I'd never really seen any positive representation of a conversation about mental illness, never saw it on TV. You know, if I ever saw a representation of mental illness, it was typically a very negative one, where someone was being criticized or being looked down upon or discriminated against. And so I didn't even really know how to have a conversation about mental illness, let alone my own. And so I remember in those early recovery days, I struggled a lot to express myself. And I'd sit in therapy rooms just struggling to put words to my experience. And therapists would have asked me things like, how do you feel today? Or kind of, can you share a little bit more about how you felt this week? And I'd just be at a loss for words. And so I think that experience, that personal experience, led me into taking psychology in my undergrad degree. And in my undergrad degree, as I started to collect frameworks and vocabulary words to talk about my experiences, I was like, hey, there's something there, just learning how to talk about my experiences. That's something that feels very promising and reassuring for me. And so in my third year of college, I started an on-campus club, and it was called Body Banter. And really, I was just curious to see what other people were saying about the same issues I'd gone through. I just wanted to ask someone, hey, what did you go through? Have you ever experienced something similar? To be honest, the first couple of conversations were really awkward and really tough to have, as would be expected. I think in any kind of conversation about issues that are quite new, or perhaps you've just never talked about it openly, it feels kind of sticky or sensitive, like topics about mental illness. It doesn't come naturally. And I think it's unfortunate that many people expect to be well equipped immediately when they have these conversations. It never sounds good. You're going to ask bad questions. There are going to be awkward silences. And so that's kind of what I learned in those early years of Body Banter. And then COVID came around, like fast forward many years throughout college, and we expanded in the U.S. circle, and then just a little bit in Hong Kong because I wasn't based in Hong Kong at the time. And then when I found myself back in Hong Kong during COVID, I had quite a lot of time to invest in just other projects in addition to finishing up school at the time. A lot of the commute time that I would have had was just empty now. So I spent a lot of time on Body Banter, and we were able, along with some volunteers, we were able to build it into a more formalized organization. And then we registered as a charity last year, or 2 years ago now. So it's quite exciting to see it grow quite organically and very much based in my personal experience.
I love it. I think that a lot of us actually have shared experiences very similar to yours. That when you were talking about how people ask you these questions like doctor and therapist, you actually don't know how to express, because I think it really rooted down to we were never taught to pinpoint our feelings. Like we only know like sadness, anger, and like not the emotion within.
Yeah.
So it's really tough to start this conversation with someone. I'm so glad that you're starting to do it. And because I personally also had a similar route. I think mine was more because I think my struggles lies within more my family, because my dad is a doctor. Like he's a Western medicine doctor. I originally thought because he received all the education, surrounded by all these medical experts, people in his circle would already know a lot about mental health, but that is so far away from the truth.
For sure, I hear that.
Yeah, so I just feel like, since professionals that we look up to, that we look for information, they don't really know about a lot of the aspects in mental health. So as someone who's been through depression, anxiety, I should just use my own experience and stem from there to share and to just tell people what I know to see if people resonates. And
Definitely.
I just feel like there's so many challenges in doing that in Hong Kong, and I definitely just want to ask you straight off the bat, how has it been? How's it been doing mental health work in Hong Kong? It's such a society that has been, I guess, just closed-minded for so many years, and shut off from topics like these, and not ever talking about it in school.
No, you're so right, and I'm excited to talk about the work of doing mental health advocacy in Hong Kong, and just what you were saying about maybe a more biomedical model of mental illness. I think it usually is the model that gives people a sense of security. When people first start learning about mental illnesses, it's kind of nice to know that, okay, so these are categorical ways of looking at illness. It feels reassuring to people to know that, for example, it's neatly categorized into these kinds of illnesses. It's listed in the diagnostic manual as such. The symptom clusters look like this. If I can spot these symptom clusters, then I can heal this illness. And I think that actually speaks, the reason why I think stigma is so pervasive in Hong Kong is that biomedical model is so attractive to people. And so when it comes to having what are realistically much messier emotions, experiencing mental distress is far from neat and tidy. And a lot of times we just see people sliding between different diagnoses, and people have overlaps in anxiety and depression. And even within eating disorders, there can be people who are sliding between binge eating behaviors and restrictive behaviors throughout different times of the illness. So it's just messy. And I think that particular understanding of mental illness or mental health problems is kind of scary to a lot of people, because it means that, first of all, everyone is susceptible. It's possible for everyone to have a mental illness at some point in their lives. Whether or not it happens, it's scary to think that there's a possibility that everyone would. I think many people have a hard time accepting that. And so it's easier to distance oneself from the entire category and say, okay, so you people with mental illness, not my business. And that's what stigma is.
Yeah.
And it's so tied to that, that biomedical model of, okay, so everything is neat and tidy and in categories. So yeah, I think just getting past that mindset, first of all, is a challenge. Just encouraging people to see mental illness as a spectrum, from anywhere from being in positive mental health to sliding to a little bit poor mental health to somewhere that goes all the way to the end of the spectrum of mental illness. and seeing that we all lie on the spectrum at any given point.
Yeah.
And another challenge that is quite prominent also is, Hong Kong people, because we are so rushed and impatient, we want to solve the problem ASAP. And so a lot of times when people come to us with expressions of distress and they're like, I am struggling, the first thing that you want to say as a family member or friend is like, mo gam la, like, 開心啲啦, be happier, don't be like that. For me, it was something like, oh, just eat that thing. What's stopping you? I had a doctor that said, croissants are so yummy. Why don't you just go eat one? And I was like, I wish I could. If I could get through all of this baggage in my brain.
I'm trying to not roll my eyes right now because
Roll
that has
them.
happened so many times.
And I think we can all acknowledge that it comes from a good place most of the time. People just don't, especially if someone has watched you struggle for a long time, let's say it's a family member or friend, it's kind of like they just want to be like, let me pull you out of the water as soon as possible. Let me help you solve your problem. But if you look on the flip side of someone who's struggling, I mean, personally, and I think for many people who I've talked to, it's more just like, you can't help pull me out of the water, so can you just sit next to me and listen to what I have to say? Just sit with me as I swim, or kind of hold the floaty with me and then swim with me.
Yes.
So that I don't feel quite as lonely as I find my own way to the shore. The way I tried to explain, and this actually came from one of the stories of our ambassadors. I also work with Mind HK on their anti-stigma campaigns. And one of our ambassadors who tells his story of mental illness said that feeling supported on his journey is very similar to a Cantonese saying, Pui Bun Tong Hang. So walking alongside. And this particular sentence or kind of this phrase really captures it, I think. It's kind of walking shoulder to shoulder with someone who's struggling, like giving a sense of empathy, not talking down to, but more so walking with. And I think that's the kind of energy that I hope to bring to mental health advocacy work in Hong Kong. Just saying, like, yes, I understand the intention of wanting to help, but if you truly want to help, think about being next to the person, not trying to fully understand a lot of the time, just being there shoulder to shoulder. Yeah,
that is so important. It's just so funny that like you.
You're like rolling our eyes.
Yeah, because like having mental health illness is really similar to having like a physical illness too. And you won't say to someone who has a flu like, oh, like just eat this damn thing, like if they're like coughing and like sneezing, like you won't do that. Like, but it's true. Like when someone has a physical illness, it's so much easier to do. Like the thing that you said, just like take it slow, take it easy. Like these are the things that we say to people when they're experiencing like a flu. And I just don't understand sometimes why it's so hard to reapply it to people suffering from like mental health illness. And one thing that I want to like ask you is that when you said like people not understanding this, a lot of people also see our faces, like happy, positive images on social media and even just like on the street. And no one would think that, oh, we are people who have been through or are going through mental illnesses. And on the contrary, that if someone on social media, I've seen this on so many of my friends' cases, that they share very vulnerably about their own mental health experiences, and people judge them, and people will say things like, oh, but you look so happy. I'm sure it doesn't come from like a bad place, but you just don't understand it. They don't understand how it's possible to smile and go to work and do normal human daily things when you're going through something. So how do you break this stereotype?
The way I would link it is to the idea or the experience of perfectionistic tendencies. And I think in Hong Kong, it's hard to reveal our vulnerabilities and to tell other people how we're really doing, even if we're not doing so well. Let's say it's hard to take a sick day from work. It's hard to say that we're not doing well. It's hard to say that you're even tired. And it all comes down to this feeling of perhaps the need to perform, to compete, to show up as someone 有面, to have face. And it's such a kind of a rooted feeling within Asian cultures, I'd say. And so I think it's really tied to that feeling of not quite being able to, one of the reasons why people might hesitate to share how they're really feeling. And then I think it's also tied to the fear that either you're going to be a burden to someone else or that other people are going to judge you for it. It's again related to this feeling of, well, we are a collectivistic culture, and in many ways, even if you're maybe, let's say you've been educated abroad and you have a little bit more individualistic aspects of your identity, I'd say that to my core, I still have more sensitivity to the judgment and the perceptions of others. Just because I grew up in a family where that was important, just caring about what other people would feel, making decisions based on how other people would feel. So, when I think about perhaps tendencies that we have, let's say trying to show up in a happy, positive light, I think about like the upbringing and how that's influenced those core needs and to show up in a certain way in the world. I kind of went a little bit back and deep over there, but I think that's what I would say to maybe perhaps unpacking the reasons why people feel so pressured to look happy on the front, and why other people, perhaps looking inwards, might not see, even if there's a sense of connection with the other person's distress. It's like, oh, should I ask them? Like, is it offending them if I say that?
How do you navigate this then? Like, for people maybe wanting to ask family members, friends, or like colleagues, because it's still a sensitive topic, in Hong Kong. What if you want to really care for somebody, or you sense that something is off? Like, how will you go about handling that conversation?
I think it's tricky, especially for perhaps relatives of the older generation who might have, truly grown up in a way of very self-sufficient, I don't need anyone's help kind of mentality. And you might have also, if you grew up in an Asian family, it's possible that you've also experienced being told, oh, we had it so much worse than you. You shouldn't feel this way because look at how mentally tough our generation was. And I think there are kind of two ways to answer that. I think checking in with a family member or a loved one who's going through a hard time, especially if they're not used to expressing their emotions, I think a really good way to do that is to do an activity. So saying like, oh, do you want to go for dinner? Or do you want to go on a walk or a hike? And when, again, it goes back to that concept of shoulder to shoulder, I think, because you're not bringing them on a specific, you're not like, okay, sit across from me as I lecture you about mental health. You're saying, I want to spend time with you because I care about you. And usually as you're eating or as you're walking, the person loosens up a little bit. Just take it as an emotional warm-up in addition to a physical warm-up. As you're starting to open up the topics, you slip in, slide in a little bit of a conversation like, hey, I noticed that it kind of seems like there's a lot that's been going on for you recently. I care about you, and can you tell me a bit about like what's been going on? And it doesn't have to be an intense conversation or an intervention, unless the person is really showing signs that perhaps they're going to harm themselves, or even suicidal ideation. That's a whole nother issue.
Right.
That becomes a clinical matter. But then, in those stages where the person seems to be going through distress, it's helpful just to be like, I noticed something that's different about you. I care about you. I'm here. You don't have to talk right now, but just know that when you're ready, I've got you. And that is usually, like, no one can fight back against that, because you're not saying, there's something wrong with you, tell me now. Like, not a combative or defensive way. So that's one thing.
I love that so much, actually. It kind of reminds me with this conversation with another relationship therapist that I had on the podcast. And she said something like, when you talk to your partner, when someone says, I need to talk to you on a message, that in itself it's just triggering. When you just just reminds me of how with actually every conversation with every loved ones, we need to treat it with more sensitivity and just put in more compassion and care to go from an approach of what's up, just tell me about your day, instead of me trying to impose my assumptions and ideologies on you, oh, I need you to be like this, you need to eat more of that. If someone tells you to do something, you will never do it.
So true. As much as you love the person,
Yeah.
it's hard to definitely hard to do that.
Exactly.
Especially if it's like telling you what to do as a demand. Yeah, as human beings, we just don't respond well to that.
So how's it been actually, managing a charity on this topic?
Yeah, so Body Banter as it is right now, we are a fully volunteer run model. This means that we have no employed staff and we heavily depend on community collaborations as well as volunteer support in order to function. I think this has actually been a huge strength in our organization. You could say that, and obviously kind of in the longer term, I would hope that we'd be able to increase our capacity and the work that we're able to do through getting funding and having paid staff. But while we're still operating in this volunteer-based model, I think one of the coolest things is that when we do collaborations, and because we so heavily depend on them, we're kind of encouraged to look into the community to see not just with mental health related organizations, or there is no other body image focused organization or charity in Hong Kong. And so we look to, first of all, mental health related organizations, but increasingly we've also been looking to non-mental health related organizations. And this has really, in the past year, it's really changed my view of how to do mental health advocacy. Because when we do collaborations with, let's say we recently did a collaboration with an organization called Belonging. And Belonging does a lot of work with ethnically diverse communities in Hong Kong, and they use storytelling strategies in order to spark conversations about difficult topics. And so you can see that there's overlap there, but they don't exclusively focus on mental health topics. So again, there was like some difference, but then kind of the core values that we've had are very aligned. So we ended up doing a storytelling based workshop with incorporating storytelling strategies into a workshop on body image topics. What we found was that, first of all, it reached audiences that Body Banter itself might not otherwise have reached. And then also it opened up my mind also to what are some of the ways that we can spark these conversations without necessarily just using words. And the storytelling workshop involved parts of kind of artistic mediums as well. So we created dumpling packages of our stories with body image. And what happened, this was really thanks to Belonging and their collaborators for developing the framework of this workshop. But for us at Body Banter, we provided kind of the expertise and the guidance with regards to body image topics. So this collaboration just really prompted me to think about what body image advocacy could look like, and just speaking to what it's like to kind of work in Hong Kong. We need to do more collaborations between organizations, because I think that the more I look into the field of not just NGOs, but even corporates, there are lots of different organizations that have aligned values. And when we're able to kind of build the blocks together and see, that's a common interest, here's a strength that you don't have, and here's a weakness I need to be filled. And then it builds into something that can be a lot more powerful and reach a lot more audiences. So I'm thankful to the volunteer model for doing that, because it's like by necessity we need to work with others, but it's also very beneficial for us reaching different populations. So yeah.
It's actually so great that you mentioned this, because I think it also points out that mental health doesn't stand alone as its individual category. It really is just a small piece of the puzzle to everything.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So true.
Like you said, storytelling, it's so important. And even I was reached out by marketing people that how to, I don't know how to put them together, but apparently in marketing they also need to consider how it affects people's mental health with their advertisements, and it affects so much. And I just love that you're pulling all these different parties together and collaborating. And I've actually had people ask me on this podcast, through DMs, they want to get into the wellness industry, because I think a lot of us here, like I said, have shared experiences with having been through these traditional upbringings and kind of silencing these kind of topics. So, and now, thankfully, everyone's a little bit more open to talk about this. So how can people start?
Starting just any conversation about well-being. There are two ways to go about it. Some people have lived experience, and if you have lived experience and you choose to or are comfortable with using that as an avenue to getting into the wellness space. I think there are lots of ways to contribute, even just speaking to the ambassador program, the anti-stigma campaign at Mind. We work with ambassadors who have lived experience, and also a plug for the Mind campaign. It's called More Than a Label. And the philosophy behind it is that the diagnosis is not something we should eliminate entirely. So a lot of people who have lived experiences of mental illness will say that their diagnosis was actually a very powerful part of the healing process, because it gave them reassurance that there's a name to my pain, and I can finally have words to talk about my experiences. And so we're not saying, remove the label. It's very much like we're thinking about we're more than that.
Yeah.
We're more than just that diagnosis. So that's the
I love it.
yeah. So that's the I love all the synchrony that's going on today. But yeah, if you wanted to be use your lived experience in that way, story sharing and talking about your experiences openly in a guided environment, optimally. If there is someone there to, especially let's say with public sharings, it's usually helpful to know that some types of details, like if you're talking about eating disorder experiences, not to talk about the numbers or the what your lowest weight was, the calories that you had at your lowest point. These kinds of details aren't helpful, and this is something that is kind of shown over and over in the research about mental health advocacy related to lived experience. I think if you're someone who has lived experiences with mental health problems and you're hoping to get into the wellness space, one of the ways to do that is to use that to actually share a story about lived experience and to open up the conversation, whether it's in your own circles, your interpersonal relationships, or in a more public space. And then let's say there's another option of, if you have lived experience but you don't want to use that as your primary avenue of sharing or advocacy, you can just use that knowledge and the empathy you have to invest in or participate in different kinds of wellness initiatives. So whether that's working at an NGO that promotes mental health, and knowing that in your head that these are people, let's say the people you serve or your beneficiaries might be going through something similar, helps you enhance your sense of empathy. And then there's also people who have never experienced, let's say, a mental illness or never had a kind of significant period of a mental health problem. Then for those people, it's about learning about other stories. Again, just connecting to those lived experiences. So it's kind of in tandem, and they work together, but ultimately it's more about not making assumptions about what other people are going through, and just exploring stories of different people's experiences, especially if you're an ally and you're intentional about learning about it. Listen to this podcast. That's already a great step. Learn more about the experiences, so when you do the mental health advocacy work, you're not looking at it from a space of that's just a person with a diagnosis. That's a person. It's a person with a story and a family and circles of friends and meaningful lives.
I think what you just said is so important, because it's not just for people, who are in mental health. I think a lot of us who are listening who just want to know more about this and to support people around them. Like, this is such a great first step, just to get to know stories, not to make assumptions. Like, all of this is just generally very helpful in the workplace and your family, just holding on to these I get the key points. I want to ask, what is one of the best advice and the worst advice that you've received in the field of mental health?
I struggle to think about the worst advice because it just deletes from my memory.
Oh, amazing. Okay, amazing. We can just skip that part.
And that's what I'd recommend. If you get negative messaging or criticism, just delete. The best advice, or perhaps something that is an accumulation of different kinds of advice I've gotten over the years, perhaps an essence of the wisdom I've collected from all my experiences and words from friends and family. It's actually a quote at the back of my book. The quote is, "Your mess is your message." And it's my favorite quote because it's a daily reminder that it doesn't need to be neat in order to be something that's worth listening to. And a lot of times, the big chunky stuff that you need to work through in your podcast and in your podcast, in your life, can often be something that resonates deeply with others and with yourself. I don't believe that you have to learn a lesson from every hardship. Sometimes you'll just go through hard stuff and then you just need to get it done with and then move on. But typically what happens, even if you don't kind of take a lesson from it, it will guide your journey in a certain direction. I always believe it's going to take you along a path that enhances your understanding of self just a little bit. And whether or not you use that lesson to educate others or to advocate, I think it's valuable regardless. But yeah, I think your message quote speaks more directly to advocacy work or contributing to the community based on your experiences, but it can also kind of speak to that personal learning aspect of it. Yeah, message for yourself, doesn't have to be for someone else.
I cannot wait to read your book now. I need to get this. It's like everything that you said just resonates so much. I never phrased it this way. This is actually the first time I've heard this quote. It just makes so much sense on so many levels.
Yeah.
And I think my way of phrasing it is that there's no failures in life. It's all just lessons and redirections.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And to be clear, your message has kind of been thrown around in different. I can't trace it back to where I first heard it, but yeah, I think it really captures my journey well. And I think for many people, it clicks because we all have our twists and turns in life, and more often than not, it's something that leads us somewhere else that's meaningful, or where we can learn something.
Exactly. And just now that you said this has like a personal message aspect to it, it actually ties perfectly to our last question, which is, can you share something that you love about yourself?
The thing I love most about myself is I think because of those tough experiences I've had in the past, I have what I would call an empathetic edge to the way I interact. And I'm proudest of the way that I'm able to almost sense on a deeper level how someone might be experiencing, particularly in experiences of pain. And I'm usually able to connect and ask questions in a way that comforts them. And, also able to share joy and a lot of deep emotional experiences in moments of share those deep emotional experiences with others. So I'm really able to kind of glow with others when they're joyful, to feel pain with others when they're going through something tough, and communicate those emotions well. That's something I've developed over the years, communicated some of the hardest experiences I've ever had. So now whenever I do need to talk about my emotions or express myself to others, I don't find that quite as difficult. And that's the thing I love most, and I'm proudest of about myself.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I just have one follow-up question.
Yeah.
When you talked about like now that you've practiced how to articulate your feelings, can you give us a tip on that? Because it is really hard.
Yeah, I think sometimes it takes more than just, and maybe you've experienced this too, sometimes it's more than words, and more than a single emotion word can capture. And what I find helpful is either saying a bunch of words that capture the experience, or trying to say or explain the emotion based on textures and colors. So I'm feeling a red squishy emotion right now. I don't really know what it is, but it's red and squishy. Or comparing it to something, like my joy feels like the sunset orange. It's that warm glow that I feel inside. So comparing emotions to maybe physical objects or visible things, and also comparing it to kind of things that aren't just, like things like textures and even tastes and scents. Yeah, so that can be quite helpful. And a second thing is that practice with someone that is supported and kind of there to listen to you as somehow you are going to find yourself being confused as to what you're saying. And for someone to be able to sit there and for you to be able to articulate that you don't really know what you're feeling is also a really powerful experience. Just for that person to be like, yeah, like I'm here to listen, take your time as you process the emotion. That can be very, very powerful as well.
Oh, yeah. I love that when you compare, like put emotions to visible objects.
so fun.
Yeah, I guess it's so true that like, oh, when you see certain things, like if you see like a puppy or something so cute, you feel that like warm and fuzzy inside, and then when you feel it some other time, you just like, oh, what is this? But it's actually like a fluffy dog.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think that's such a good comparison because, I mean, even just trying to explain to you the feelings I'm having right now in this moment, it's a huge combination of excitement and gratitude that we finally made it happen.
Yeah.
It's not a neat and tidy. It's not just like I'm happy to be here, Leanne. Like it's so much more than that. And I, when I want to explain that to you, or even articulating that experience, I have so many more. It's not a single word or even a couple of words. It's like I feel this warm, like glowing sensation that goes through my whole body. I like to say that joy feels like orange juice that's the color of a sunset. And I'm being filled to my nose level with that color of orange juice. And that's what I'm feeling right now, and it's kind of flowing through me. So, I just wanted to share that with you.
Oh, well, I'm so happy that you're feeling orange juice and sunset with me. Oh my gosh, thank you so much for being here today.
You have to answer first of all, what do you love about yourself?
Okay.
And also, if you want to tell me about your emotion.
Oh, I'm feeling like a calm wave on like a jelly sea. Do you know this term?
I don't know what a jelly sea is.
It's really in Chinese like 果冻海. So it's like it's like a pot of jello and it's just like shiny and then like
I like that.
Yeah.
It's very chill feeling. That's nice.
It's chill, like comfortable.
I love that.
Oh.
It's amazing.
And the thing that I love about myself, I think right now, at this moment, I quite like my positivity. This may sound like negative to some people, but it's a positive thing to me. Mm-hmm. Is that my like innocence outlook?
Yeah, you see things I hear what you were trying to say.
Yeah.
So like you see things with purity and optimism.
Exactly.
Maybe that's the way to put it.
Like I'm actually going to Mexico
Woo!
By myself, and literally everyone around me is just pointing out how dangerous it is, and like and I've done so many research, and there's actually very safe and very great things about the country, and I'm just choosing to use my more positive lens to look at this trip.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think I quite like that about myself. Like, yes, there's danger, but there's also things that you can do to not be in those dangerous places. Mm-hmm. And I think that, law of attraction, if I feel this trip with like joy and happy things, then I'll just attract those things. And I've always believed and lived with this. So, yeah.
Yeah, I know you're an adventurous soul and you hop between different places for work anyway. So I'm excited for you to explore Mexico, and I hope you have a great time. And
thank you guys as well.
Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you and everyone for being here today and just being present and just tuning into this amazing conversation. So can you just tell everyone where can they find you? Where can they find your book?
Thanks, Leanne, for having me. And again, thanks for tuning in, everyone. You can find me on Instagram at _TheMightyMunchkin. Exactly what it sounds like. No spaces. And then _TheMightyMunchkin_. That's my personal Instagram handle. And then Body Banter is Body Banter's Instagram handle. And the book also has its own Instagram handle. It's Big Bites, Break Boundaries. And if you want to purchase the book, you can go in the link in my bio, so the _TheMightyMunchkin, or you can also go on my website. So it's themightymunchkin.weebly, WEEBLY.com. So yeah, just go ahead and see what floats your boat. Explore as much or as little as you want. But thanks anyway for tuning in today.
And we'll talk to you soon. Bye.